Welcome to another episode of the Fast Performance Baseball Podcast, where we delve into the mechanics, mysteries, and methodologies of baseball with those who shape the game from behind the scenes and on the field. Today we have a special guest whose expertise lies at the intersection of physical therapy and peak athletic performance, Edwin Porras. Edwin Porras, a doctor of physical therapy, board-certified orthopedic specialist, and the founder of Pro Athlete PT, is with us to unpack his proactive approach to physical therapy. An approach that not only heals, but enhances and extends the capabilities of athletes. Starting from an unconventional route inspired by early online videos by mobility expert Kelly Starrett, Edwin has carved out a niche that challenges the norms of traditional physical therapy, focusing instead on preventing injuries and optimizing performance. During the global pandemic, while many retreated, Edwin advanced his expertise through additional formal training. This dedication prepared him for a pivotal role with the Minnesota Twins, where his work had a direct impact on player health and team performance. Today's conversation will explore Edwin's innovative techniques, such as blood flow restriction training, and his unique integration of psychological support to address the high pressures faced by professional athletes. We also discuss the insights he offers young athletes and their coaches on safe strength and conditioning practices, debunking common misconceptions, and guiding them toward athletic long-term success. Looking ahead, Edwin will share his vision for expanding Pro Athlete PT and how he plans to incorporate the latest research and strategies into his practice. Edwin joins us in the studio here at Fast Performance to share his journey through the world of sports medicine, his philosophy on athlete care, and the lessons he has learned from the heart of professional sports. Edwin, welcome to the podcast. Could you start by sharing what initially drew you to the field of physical therapy? And as you state on your bio on your website, like how early influences like Kelly Starrett shaped your views?
Yeah, man. I mean, really a lot of it came down to just watching these really grainy, low quality YouTube videos from Kelly Starrett, right? So Kelly Starrett's a physical therapist. He's
a goat.
Huge. He's a goat. He's one of the goats, Mount Rushmore. So I had only ever seen a physical therapist operate in the role of they wear really ugly khakis, they wear tennis shoes, and then they wear an old worn polo, and they're playing classic rock like Don't Stop Believing in the background, and there are 80-year-old patients sitting on tables kicking their leg up, not really making any effective changes to their life. That's where I grew up. So when I found Kelly Starrett, I was like, oh, like this PT thing could actually work. There's actually something that I could go for. So that's sort of my genesis of how I really got into the sports performance world as a physical therapist.
Okay. So you've mentioned that on your website that traditional physical therapy practices often restore athletes to only about 80% of their health. Can you elaborate on what you observe and how it impacted your career direction?
Without getting on a soapbox, I really want to be as fair as possible. There are big box physical therapy chains, just like there are big box everything. In those big box PT chains that are insurance based, what you see a lot of times is they need to keep the lights on. They need to pay everybody. And the reality is the CEO needs to get their big fat chunk at the end of the month. So they pump patients out because more patients equals more units. When you get more patients and more units, that means less time with your PT. Generally, again, I don't want to, overly generalize. Generally, you get younger PTs who don't have a ton of experience. They take their bumps, they take their lumps, right? That happens to everybody. But the unfortunate reality is that a lot of times when clients and patients want to go through their insurance, that their experience ends up being so bad, they initially will say, well, I can't really afford this up front. Then they realize after all the bills are paid, after I do my copay, I still get another bill in the mail for another $1,000. I might as well have just gone through like a cash pay practice. On top of what you just said is that because of all of that, I want to call it lack of skill or lack of knowledge, a lot of times clients and patients don't get better. Some of them don't even get to 80%.
Is there just is it come from just a lack of experience, you think? Because that's something I talk about with our athletes all the time is when you're looking for a physical therapist, like don't just I think like you're saying, don't be overly broad, but there, to me at least, seems to be a lot of people will go to a physical therapist and the sole goal is to get them to where they were pre-injury.
Yeah. So again, not to overly generalize, but generally speaking, yes, right? If you're a baseball player, you're probably ideally set up to go to somebody who has worked with baseball players. Mm-hmm. If you're if you have pelvic floor issues, right? I've referred people out who have pelvic floor issues to a pelvic floor physical therapist because that's their specialty, that's their niche. I'm not going to try to help those people. And The reality is a lot of PTs in general that are sort of generalists, they're okay at one or two things, but they're not really great at one specific thing. That's really, I think, what it comes down to. But honestly, you could say that about probably any field.
Right. I do notice that a lot. Like, I think people just kind of underestimate the power of people who specialize in specific fields. I think it's probably just an ignorance thing, because like until you don't think about it until you have to think about it. But like, it seems to me like a lot of athletes I've had in the past are just like, well, my mom knows a physical therapist that did something for her back or whatever, so we're gonna go see them. Like, assuming that all PTs come from they all come from the same level of knowledge, the same base of knowledge, that every athlete's the same.
Right.
And just like, if I can fix my back, that, this lady fixes 60-year-old women's backs, they'll be able to fix my back as a baseball player, even though they're two totally different mechanisms.
100%. And the thing too that we say to PTs, sort of a phrase that gets thrown around as PTs, but I think applies in this specific situation, is physical therapy school in general makes you a quote unquote safe practitioner. They want to make sure you're not going to kill anybody. They want to make sure you pick up on, this isn't looking right. Let's get you to see somebody who could look at this and have a different lens, like a medical doctor, somebody, maybe we have like something more scary on board, something like could potentially be like a cancer, right? Those are the things we train for. Once you leave school, you are trained to pass the boards, be safe. You're not trained to be a sports physical therapist, right? I don't want to crap on any new grad who comes out and is like, hey, I'm a sports physical therapist, because they're getting their feet wet, they're doing it. The reality is you're not really a sports physical therapist or an orthopedic physical therapist or a pelvic floor physical therapist until you have some reps under your belt. And really, I guess, to bring it back to full circle to the original question, a lot of new grads work in those chain physical therapies that are, the system's already set up for them to fail, right? On top of the fact they don't have a lot of reps under their belt.
Yeah, it's kind of the difference between, like, for me, like being driveline certified and on-base use certified. It's like, I know how to do the things, I know how the systems work, but if I'm only solely relying on my certification, I'm not going to get very far.
Right, exactly. Letters, yeah, that's the other thing too. You bring up a good point. Letters don't mean anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can have all the letters in the
diploma,
world,
a diploma or a certificate doesn't mean shit.
It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, so that's a whole different topic for another day.
So something you talk about often, especially on your website, is that during the pandemic, you undertook additional formal training, right? What motivated you to pursue this during such, everyone, we don't want to go back to that whole time period, but, what were some of the key learnings that you gained doing that? So what did you specifically do extra work on?
Yeah, so the reason I did is probably because I was probably really dumb to do that.
Yeah.
So it was the middle of the pandemic. It was July of 2020. They actually pushed it back. It was an orthopedic residency. So I didn't originally, well, my original plan was not to go and work for a pro sports team like I did. My original plan was like, hey, I want to get this solid fundamental reps under my belt, right? In this orthopedic residency that is just an additional year of training that I paid for, because I wanted to suck less at what I did, right? All the things that I just said, I wouldn't say those if I didn't actually work myself on getting those reps. So I went and did the orthopedic residency training, got a ton of reps under my belt, just got absolutely lambasted by my mentors every session, right? Like, so we'd see clients together, they'd come in and I'd go through my thing. And then at the end, they'd be like, here's all the stuff you missed. Here's all the stuff you'll ask next time, that you'll do next time, blah, 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 blah. Right. So like, imagine doing that for a year, right? Even if it's not, there's not just one way to do things, you would at least start to see how the puzzle pieces start to fit together. So you start getting experience that way. So that's what I did. And that's where I was for a year.
Mm-hmm. So what did you learn getting out of that extra time?
No, yeah, good question. So what I learned was, again, not everybody's the same. What I learned is that I can't be somebody for everybody. That year, I referred a ton of clients, whether it was because they needed to see an MD, because they had pelvic floor issues, because they had maybe like more neurological type stuff, brain type stuff going on, right? Like, that is really where I learned, okay, yeah, I can be something for somebody. I can't be everything for everybody. That's really where like the niche, like the idea of a niche really does. I know it's so cliche, but the riches really are in the niches from a personal standpoint, from a professional standpoint, right? From a financial standpoint. The more that you niche down, and I learned that through my residency, the more specialized you become, the more generally useful, in my opinion, I think you can be to people.
Right. So when you were working with the Twins, because you worked for 2 years with the Twins at the spring training facility in the complex, right? That's where you mostly spend most of your time. must have been a very awesome experience to just get to hang. You see all sorts of different levels of athletes, from the big leaguers all the way to the complex league guys. Variety of level of skills, a variety of level of talent. So, could you describe what a typical day in that environment looks like, and maybe share maybe a memorable case that you felt you made a significant difference in maybe an athlete's career?
Yeah, man. Long days, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like it's a grind, especially during spring training.
What time would you start at?
So it depends. One year we'd start at, our first meeting was at 6:15. The next year they took it really easy on us, and our first meeting was at 7. So it really depended on what time.
45-minute
right?
window.
Exactly. So really, it just depended on the day, the time of the year, and all that stuff. But generally speaking, you'd start somewhere in the neighborhood between 6:30, 7:15, 7:30. Now you'd go in, you show up, go through the meetings. For us as rehab PTs, right? You have the athletic trainers who are there with the rookie ball team, and they are taking care of the whole team, right? Most of them are healthy. If not, they get sent to us. So we get all the long-term cases from, big leaguers who want to come to Fort Myers down through the rest of the levels. If they're a long-term rehab, they would come to us. So every day we'd go through our list. We'd say, hey, we have this guy, this guy, this guy. We do our best. There are 4 PTs or 5 PTs, depending on the year. And we would basically go through their case daily. Hey, this guy's got 60 feet today. This guy's got, 50 swings. This guy's going to long toss today. And we're progressing them through their day. We talk about everything that we were going to do. We'd go get breakfast, that was the coolest thing, honestly. Now, some days the breakfast wasn't great, of course, but it was free, right? Free breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That was probably my favorite part. So we go to breakfast, come back, and then guys would show up. They'd do their warm up. They'd do some of their rehab stuff, right? Then you'd break for the day. You'd go and they'd go through their drills, right, with the coaches. So it was like a practice day. It was their whole work day, right? They'd go through hitting, they'd go through defensive drills, team stuff, etc. Some days they'd have scrimmages, live BPs. It just depended on the day. So then they'd come out, around 11:30. They'd break off from that stuff, and then the rehab guys would come back. We do more rehab stuff, right? We more strengthening, symptom control, stuff like that. Obviously, they had their lift somewhere in between there. They'd go and do their lift or their aerobic work. And then once they left, that's when you had to do all your admin stuff, your programming, your meetings and minutia and stuff like that. But it was pretty cool, man. I mean, we were done treating players by like 1 o'clock, depending on the situation.
Okay, that's
and
not the worst.
It's not
day.
bad. So your afternoons were pretty chill.
7 to 1.
Yeah, it's not bad. And so once we were done there, like I said, we do all the other stuff. I don't know if I missed anything. And you got one more question. Oh, case.
Yeah, you have a memorable case.
Dude, so many cases.
Can you bring
so
up
many
names?
Cases. So there's a case.
Drop some names.
I won't drop names.
Oh.
But one of the coolest things, one of the coolest cases that I worked was, and I mentioned this in I Pro Athlete PT on the blog. I call him Johnny. It's not his name, but so Johnny's a rookie ball player. Came in. It was his 3rd stint in rehab. He'd been in rehab even before I even got there, right? So his 1st stint with me, 3rd stint overall, and he had elbow pain, right? UCL. Sent him to the doc, got an MRI, got a UCL sprain. This kid threw pretty nasty stuff. His fastball is hilarious. He's like 170 pounds maybe, and he threw like a 95-mile-an-hour heater. It was wild. So, but
for me as a pitching coach, I'm like, oh boy,
yeah, it's wild. And he's like 18, 19, right?
Yeah.
So he's got you got a huge ceiling mass,
of course.
So anyway, but he's hurt, right? So he comes in and we get to talking. And long story short, man, again, I mentioned this on the blog. Had no idea how many hours you were sleeping, no idea how much protein he was. He knew he wasn't eating enough protein because he knew he wasn't eating enough. He wasn't eating breakfast.
Oh, he was 170 pounds.
Yeah, exactly, right. So he on the weekends he'd stay up till like 1 or 2, and then during the week he'd stay up until 11 midnight. He wasn't sleeping. He didn't track any of his pitches. He didn't have any set routine. How many plyos you throw? I don't really know, right? So, dude, it was like from top to bottom, we just like check the box, and you're going to do it this way. And initially, it kind of especially with the younger guys, it kind of is that way. You're like you telling them what to do, as opposed to once you get to they're a little older, right? The big leaguers, you're kind of more of a consultant. It's like, hey, try this, try that. So with him, it was like boom, 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 check the box. Long story short, after his long rehab, his grip strength improved by like 10 pounds. He gained like 10 pounds of muscle in general. He was consistently throwing 93 to 95, where 95 was just like his ceiling before. He had no elbow pain, right? And then this year he moved up a level and he's shoving in single A.
Nice.
So that is one of the most fun stories, because it was like exactly what I try to do here right now is be as comprehensive as possible with clients who walk through the door.
So do you follow a specific and this can kind of go into the next thing, but do you follow a specific process? Like, what are the most common like especially in the lower levels of professional baseball, what are the more common injuries you see? How is it usually kind of dispersed, like between, oblique injuries or arm injuries of whatever type? Like you said, like it's on your blog, but I can't remember the exact numbers, but like what percentage is a shoulder injury, or what percentage is an elbow injury, what percentage is a hand injury? Like how are those dispersed, and what do you think are kind of like, what do you see as the most common treatments or modalities to address those issues?
Yeah, by and large, the most common injuries that we see, and in general, whether it's like lower level or higher level, is the elbows, are the shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Those are so intertwined, right? So the shoulder causes so many things downstream or prevents so many things downstream. If you don't have the mobility, the strength, and we know this, right? This isn't just me spouting stuff. Right. We know that shoulder strength is a risk factor for elbow issues and elbow pains. We know shoulder mobility is the same thing. All of those things sort of are like married. So those really are the two top things that you'd see.
It's like what's the old like childhood song we used to sing, like your shoulder bone's connected to your elbow
exactly,
bones.
exactly.
I mean, that's why I tell people, like, it's all connected. Like if your shoulders are fucked up, your elbow's going to suffer because it's got to take on like a bunch of stress that it's not designed to take on.
Exactly. And then you go downstream, right? And you don't have the grip strength like this kid that I just talked about, right? You don't have the shoulder strength. You don't have the grip strength. Well, what's going to happen to your UCL? Yeah. You have no protective mechanisms there. So those are really the two main things that you see. Now, in terms of treatments, they're really, I don't know, by the way, this is another conversation. I don't know where this phrase came from. Maybe we can dig into it. There are many ways to skin a cat. I personally don't skin cats, so I'm not going to claim to know where, but there are a lot of ways to skin a cat. But generally speaking, the way that most rehab, situations should go, you come in and you recover. You stop the painful activity. And this is what I rave about this on Instagram. Like every time a guy is injured and they've tried a couple different times to build back up and throw or to build back up and swing, every time it didn't work out, our doc would talk to us. The athlete would see the doc. Doc's like, all right, we're going to shut down. Whether that shutdown was 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever the case may be, if it wasn't a surgical case, they would get shut down. The most wild thing I see is that pitchers and athletes and high school and college guys in general will try to play through a true injury. Mm-hmm. I don't get that. I don't understand that. You're not helping yourself. You're hurting yourself. It's literally like cheating, right? Like your teachers always used to say, like, if you're cheating, you're only hurting yourself. Like that is 100% the case with an injury. So, but anyway, that's the soapbox. Number one,
it's just like toughing it out. You think? Like it's psychological. Just
I know that it goes a lot. There's a lot that goes into it, right? Like they don't want to miss out on time. They want to perform. They don't want to look soft, which I understand. Like I get there's a lot of factors going into it, but ultimately you have to take care of your body. Mm-hmm. So you have to come in and recover, shut down the activity, get you out of pain with a good physical therapy, whether that's dry needling, soft tissue, cupping, BFR, whatever you want to use, like whatever. Use that a la carte, right? You have to recover. You have to actually get out of pain. Reset the tissue, right? So after you recover, you're going to optimize. This whole time you're working on what does your thoracic spine look like, right? Your mid-back mobility. What does your shoulder mobility look like? What do your hips look like? Your low back, right? All this stuff, your neck mobility even. You're working on all these things. You're optimizing the environment that you've already sort of recovered. Then you move into the performance phase. That's when S&C gets involved. That's when the performance coaches like you get involved, right? That's where we're really collaborating to establish this new environment that the tissue is in, that the injury is in. We're trying to optimize that and lead them and truly make them better than before they even were injured. So those are the three sort of, and that's where I get the recover, optimize, perform, right? Pro. So that's where that comes from.
So in your practice at Pro Athlete Physical Therapy, you emphasize being proactive about injuries. Can you explain the difference between being proactive, which I think is, your entails, versus the reactive? Probably the more common way to go about it is the reactive versus the proactive. What are the differences in that approach between those two approaches? And, how can it, I would say it's probably better to be proactive than reactive, but what are the pros and cons of both?
Yeah, no, honestly, like I think that the the pros of not having a maintenance program or preventative stuff or being reactive to an injury, I guess you get more time on your hands, right? Like there's more time in the day to do stuff. I guess that's really the only pro I can think of. Maybe you have more. From a reactive standpoint, I mean, what are the benefits, right? The benefits right off the bat. Like you're statistically, you're thinking in bets, right? Like I love that book by Andy Duke, by the way. You're thinking in bets. You're thinking in bets. You're more statistically likely to stay healthy if you're on some sort of guided, semi-supervised maintenance program where you're working on all the risk factors we just talked about: shoulder strength, shoulder mobility, elbow strength, grip strength, mid-back mobility, what do your hips look like, your mechanics, all the stuff that matter and go into the pot of injury. You're working on all of that, and you're more likely to stay healthy than not. The other pro is you get guidance, right? Everybody needs a coach. Everybody needs guidance. Everybody, I'm feeling this tightness or that tightness. And honestly, a lot of times some athletes just need reassurance, right? You're not soft if you get this weird zing or this weird tightness and you're like nervous about it. Like asking somebody to be like, hey, like I felt this, and this, like, and then you get a guidance of, hey, if it went away, it's never happened again. It's been 3 weeks. You're probably going to be fine. Your numbers look good. Your grip looks good. You're fine. Some people just need that, right? So you get that. That's another pro to a maintenance program. And the other thing is like, you're better, right? You're better. You get to work on all the micro things. People are always so enamored. I'm not here to speak poorly about any specific system, right? But like PRI is a big one that people are like, I need to do this PRI so that I can do this and this. And it is helpful. Don't get me wrong. Like there are some concepts that I apply, but generally speaking, all of the things that fall between the cracks are going to be all the things we just mentioned, your grip strength, your shoulder mobility. Like those are the small things that people miss. And so if you really want to A, stay on the field and B, be a better athlete, then those are all the pros of what a maintenance or like a preventative program gives you.
Just a quick aside. That's why all you people that are listening to this that I program for, that's why you have all that homework at home. That right. All that extra mobility. I don't put it in there for you to just do busy shit. that's there for a reason.
Absolutely.
So when you think about your process for rehab, like how do you tailor your approach specifically for baseball players? And now obviously you don't just exclusively work with baseball players. You have enough people that are non-baseball players that come into the place as well. But when you're looking particularly at baseball related injuries or recovery scenarios, what are the more common practices that you focus on? Like I'm always interested to see, like, at what point, like, I'm assuming the first process in an injury is you work on the area that's been injured, right? It's the pain mitigation, everything like. But at what point, like, should we start with the small and then go to the broad, or do we start with the broad and then kind of work to the small? Like, we want to strength, like we talked about, like everything being connected. Like, if you've got a tight lat, we want to address that because that might be the source of your elbow pain or something like that. So, work on mobilizing and strengthening the big muscles. That way the smaller muscles don't have to do as much work, or start at the loci point. That's not even a word, but the centralized point, and then work out.
Yeah, no, it's both, right? Like, and it also depends on how much time you have available, how many resources you have available, but it's really, you try to hammer as much as you possibly can. And this is why, going back to the top of the conversation about being in a niche, number one, and two, having experience, right? So when you're a new PT, a new grad PT, you come out, you have no idea what risk factors are for specific, situations, specific pathologies. You have no idea, like, well, is it their neck or is it their shoulder? I'm not really sure, right? So you're just throwing stuff at the wall. When you have reps, when you're in a niche, when you have experience, you understand what you can work on at the same time. Whereas when you don't have that experience, you have to sort of go one thing at a time. It sort of slows things down. Sometimes you're off the mark. You don't have all the right data, et cetera, et cetera. What we do is, what my experience has granted me, my mentors have granted me, right? I'm not a one-man show, right? I've gotten to this point because of the people who have influenced me. I'm to the point where we can sort of do both. We can address the pain and we can address these specific risk factors that I think are going into your, at this point, it's faulty mechanics or something that's going on. Like you said, like we can broaden out. Maybe it's honestly all the way down to your ankle mobility, right? Like, what's your foot strike look like? How much ankle mobility do you have? Like, what does your hip stability look like? All of those things are risk factors that we can address right off the bat, in addition to getting you out of pain as quickly as possible.
Right. I know. It's always just fun when people think about, like, oh, my shoulder pain is this reason. Like, you might all go down to your ankles, right?
Yeah,
like 100%. Where it's all connected. Like, if you've got faulty ankles, you can't get into your hips correctly, and then your hips are all dysfunctional, and then it screws up your, lumbar spine, goes all the way up the chain. Yeah, it's just one of those, educating guys on how it's just, at the end of it, it's just all connected. Like, you have to take care of everything, unless everything's in the green, which for most guys, not everything's going to be in the green. No. You've got to make sure you take care of every specific spot. Don't just focus on the spot that hurts the most. Yep. Like, it's going to be all connected one way or the other. That's what Jason and I see all the time, is more often than not, guys who have that specific pain, like their ankles, like they may be mobile, but they don't, they're not stable. Like, they can't move independently of their knees or something like that. Yep. Hips can't, go in one direction because the ankle won't allow them to. And then it all comes up and finds a eventually finds a spot that you've got to compensate, and then you compensate in the wrong places.
You leak efficiency.
Exactly.
And it's just the whole thing. The other thing too, you as you were talking, that came to mind. It's going to sound weird, but like pain is also a risk factor for injury, because when you're avoiding certain movement patterns and you're avoiding certain specific mechanics, then you are changing the way that you're throwing. You're either going to get like excessive trunk lean, or you're going to get sort of not enough layback, all the things that we know are going to cause an injury down the road. Right. And it only compounds onto the pain that you already have. So, I mean, you nailed it. That's really what I want to say.
Yeah. It's just, it's all causal. And, you don't want to say causation is correlation, but, being able to understand like, okay, here, I have this dysfunction in this one body part that makes me have to compensate the next body part that makes me compensate the next one. And then I have to, I feel pain when I'm down in this arm slot. So then I have to overly flex my spine, which puts me in a risky position for over almost too much layback. And then my shoulder gets fucked up. And it's like, it all comes down to it, Before we move on though, it's always a big debate. And from a professional health standpoint, I'm sure you got your opinions. I'll have my opinions on it, but it's always because it's in the news, right? Where this increase in Tommy John surgeries, especially in the big leagues right now, like, what do you like? And I would say it's multifaceted. It's not going to be like, you're going to say you could say one thing, like, this is my number one reason. And it's like, that's part of it. But what would you say is like contributing to this rise in these arm injuries?
I would actually reframe the question, because not that it's a wrong question, but baseball injuries have been climbing forever.
Yeah.
Baseball injuries have been climbing for literally 40 years. They've been on the rise. Tommy John has been on the rise. Shoulder injuries are actually on the decline. Shoulder surgeries are on the decline. Yeah. Shoulder injuries aren't on the decline. Baseball players have been getting injured since baseball basically became, out of the Babe Ruth days, right? Like once we get to like 70s, 80s, like and became a little bit more sophisticated, baseball injuries have been climbing. This is not, the thing is, I think it's just because of the names that are being thrown out. It becomes more prevalent in people's mind.
Once a superstar or two superstars go down, it's like, oh, now we got a problem.
Exactly. And the idea and the concept that like, oh, that now the pitch clock is, the reason that these guys are like, is it playing into maybe like a 1/10 of a single percentage point? Maybe, but at best that's what it is, right? Is like a 1/10 of a single percentage point, because now they're a little more rushed. But these things are cumulative, man. Like honestly, and we're looking at this with ACLs too now recently. I know it's a different sport, different situation generally, but like the idea that a UCL is just healthy and springy and looks great and then snaps.
Yeah.
That idea is, that's pretty nonsensical.
If you played baseball for long enough.
Exactly. If you look at a baseball pitcher, if you look at an MRI of a pitcher's shoulder and elbow, and you send them to like a general doc, that doc's going to lose their mind. They're going to be like, oh my God, what is going on here? But they're playing and they have no pain, right? So I know I'm not really answering the question because I wanted to reframe it. Yeah, but that's the thing, is like all these things that we know go into injury is everything we've already talked about. Like it's mechanics, it's strength, it's mobility, it's rest, it's recovery. Like you're huge on that, which I love, right? Like you can't lift 5 days a week and expect your body to recover and actually be ready to throw. So there's not necessarily, and we won't know until 5 years from now. Like maybe 2024 was a spike in injuries for baseball. Maybe it was. I'm not saying it's not, but the data really, honestly, right now, based on what we know for the last 30 years, really is just on par. It's more present in people's mind now.
What do you think of like people who just kind of jump to conclusions on what might be like? Everyone, everyone's like, it's the spike in velocity, which everyone's been always looking for velocity increases. Like it's not like anybody who's just said like, oh yeah, I'm sitting 80, I'm good enough. Like they're always trying to find that edge. And then it's, what's weighted balls' problem. It's, this pitch clock. It's the too many innings at a younger level. And, like one of my things on people who listen to this podcast a little bit will say like one of my favorite jokes or my favorite, it's like, I wanted to create a 11th commandment in the Bible. Because everyone always blames like the weight of like the overload balls and the underload balls. It's like all this stuff. Like, was just 5 ounces just like a magical number that God came up with? Like 5 ounces is the only ball that you can throw in baseball. Like that's the perfect number. And like it's like baseball injuries never existed until all these new weighted balls came out. Like it was always just like once it was 5 ounces, and then when we tried to fuck with it, that's when all hell went to all hell broke loose. So yeah, it's just. I think people get mad about, they find their soapbox and they get mad about something, and then that's their reasoning. My soapbox is always just I think it's throw too many innings way too early
Yeah.
with not enough rest.
100%. Oh, I'm with you, dude. And that's the thing too. Like what I'm not saying is there aren't risk factors. I'm not saying it's unpredictable. I'm saying like a lot of it is not modifiable. You mentioned velo, like velo is a part of it, right? We know from the data, from literature, like the harder you throw,
the better you're going to perform.
The better you're going to perform. And both things exist. The harder you throw, the more likely you are to get an injury.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like they're married. Those things are correlated. But then it stands to reason, like what you're saying. Okay, well, let's say you start throwing 85 from the time you're 16. How long can you really throw 85? How long can your ligament hold up, right? How long can your shoulder hold up throwing that hard at such a young age? So it's not so much like our implements or specific training protocols or programs like evil. It's how much rest are you getting? How much are you recovering? Like how much are you taking care of yourself? How much are you really sleeping, right? All the things that I've talked about at the top, like it all goes into it. And are we ever going to solve baseball injuries? Like, no, dude, there are a lot of smart people working on like stopping these baseball injuries. Like one of the, like Dr. Camp, who's the Twins doc, shout out Dr. Camp. He's honestly one of the nicest guys ever. Really sweet guy and really good doc, and has been looking into the data, and like he's a genius. I mean, sometimes we have conversations and he's like, it's like so multifaceted.
It could be so many things.
It's like so many things. Like, where do you even start? Like, there are a lot of smart people trying to solve this problem, and we just haven't gotten there yet.
Well, it's something Jason and I talk about all the time. Like, you bring up a 16-year-old who throws 85. Like, what probably happens with a 16-year-old that throws 85? He pitches the most on his team.
Exactly. 100%,
yes. He's the guy who pitches the most on his team because he throws the hardest. And it's when guys, we try to teach curveballs to younger guys. It's be like people go like, oh, curveballs are bad for the elbow. I'm like, no, they're not. They're actually probably better for the elbow than the fastball is. The data would show that. The problem is when a coach finds out a kid throws a curveball, that's every other pitch. That's every other pitch that they throw.
And this kid throws a harder curveball than the other kids on his team because he throws, like you said, 85.
Yeah.
So like it all, like I think if you're listening and really paying attention, you're starting to see like
it's because the adults are not responsible.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's a lack of responsibility and accountability from the coaches. That's our problem.
That's the problem. That's the problem with society.
It's the problem with society. The adults in the room are no longer adults.
Right.
So
we're the adults in the room.
Right. But no one listens to us.
Right.
We don't have anything to say because we're not trying to compete for 5-cent trophies and medals. All right. So could you talk about any innovative technologies or techniques that you use in your practice here at Pro Athlete? Like, how do you use these advancements to help the rehab of your athletes?
Yeah, like I think it's hard to really pinpoint to say like, oh, this is the reason that like guys get better or whatever. Like, yes, we have BFR. Yes, we have, which blood flow restriction, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure everybody knows what it is listening to this podcast.
You want big biceps, do some
BFR. Right. Yeah, that's why I use it.
Oh, yeah.
So BFR, right? We have, like the other day you were watching, and I was using a dynamometer that gives us an idea of like range of motion. You just strap it onto a kid's arm. A PT or an AT or a clinician can measure range of motion. And it spits out a number. It's relatively accurate, right? Like the same thing, the dynamometer, you take your strength, right? I'm so surprised at how many clients I see who even have already seen a PT, and they've never taken an objective number of their strength, right? You don't know how many pounds of force you're actually putting through your internal rotators, your external rotators, right? Like you have no idea. So that's some of the tech that we're using there. And it's not necessarily groundbreaking, right? Like it's been around for years at this point, but it's not totally used, I think, as wisely as we possibly can, right? I think something that's not new to a lot of clinicians, but it's sort of trickling a little bit more now into the realm of recovery
general
and
population.
Gen Pop is like dry needling, right?
Yeah.
So dry needling from like a recovery standpoint, like you can use dry needles depending on the setting of your stim unit. You can set it up for like a recovery type of a pump. So there are a lot of things that I try to use. I don't try to get fancy. I don't want to recreate the wheel, right? Like you got the what are those? The recovery pumps, right? Like they're
like the Normatex,
like the Normatex, right? Like we have all
sleeves,
that stuff, right?
Yeah, the sleeves and things like Mark Pros.
Yep, Mark Pro, yeah, exactly. Like Mark Pro, like all the things that you could want, we have those here. But again, if you're coming here just for those things, like you're going to be very unhappy. You're going to realize that's like maybe 5 to 10% of your entire plan of care, because we try to be more comprehensive, but we do have some pretty cool tech that I think is useful.
How do you weigh the that's not how the way I want to put it, but just like, you understand, like, yeah, you're using Normatex or you're using a Mark Pro or you're using dry needling, and knowing that it's 5 to 10% of your actual practice or 5% of the actual rehab. But like, where, how do you understand when and where to use it on a specific athlete?
No, that's a good question. I mean, it depends, right? So like, let's take Normatec, for example. Like Normatec can be something that you use pretty much for any recovery day.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can hop into those things, you put on the sleeves, whatever the case may be.
Just watch a TV.
And yeah, exactly.
Watch an episode of The Office while those things are doing their work.
The best thing that I saw a big leaguer do with his time in the Normatex, he spent 45 minutes, he'd take a nap.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's really what it comes down to, right? Like I can hammer sleep all the time, but like you can use something like that all the time, right? Now take something like, let's say, dry needling, right? Dry needling is going to be one of those things, like, again, for recovery. Like, let's stick some needles in you. Let's set the circuit here to 20, 30 minutes. It's going to give you a pump. It's going to sort of move some of those fluid dynamics. It's going to help you recover a little bit quicker, a little bit faster, especially at the high level, at the highest levels, right? Like you want those 1 to 2% margin. If you recover 2 hours faster in the big leagues, that's 2 hours faster because your game is at 1 p.m. and this time it's not at 8 p.m., right? Like that's a huge deal, right? So we want to work in the margins. Something like dry needling, for example, for pain, right? If this guy's pain, he's got pain and he's tight, and we stick some needles in there, we throw the stem on there, and then eventually he gets to visit 3-4, and that tightness is gone, and that pain is relatively relieved. Okay, we're going to stop using, right? We don't need to continue to use that stuff, right? We don't want it to become a crutch or something that a guy feels like they need, because then they just get into bad habits. So it really depends on the situation, the circumstance, but like it's always going to come back to a conversation, right, with the client, with the athlete. Like, what are you feeling? Okay, I'm thinking this because now we're in this phase and we're going to move on to this, and now we're going to actually use this, and it flips, right? Like maybe we use dry needling for pain and tightness, and then that's when, once we get to the performance phase 3, now we're going to start using it for recovery. So it really depends on the situation and circumstances.
How do you breach the concept or the conversation of telling an athlete understanding what's the difference between hype and what is effective, right? You talk about like dry needling is part of it, Normatex, Mark Pros and all that, but like those can only be like 5 to 10% of the actual recovery process, like compared to like what they, how much of it's actually hype versus how much of it is actually effective, like with ice baths and all these other things. Whereas like, hey, go for things that are the less hype, but the most ROI, like sleep, eating, protein,
Yes. Yep.
Like having that conversation, like the Normatex aren't going to fix you unless you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night. You're getting your protein and you're eating your calories. Just like you have to be kind of hard on an athlete. Just be like, dude, I'm sorry, but the Mark Pro's just not doing shit for you.
Well, that's the thing.
Or it's marginal.
I try to broach that conversation basically right away. So on my intake forms, I have like, how much are you sleeping? How much protein are you eating? What does your general mental health and like mental load look like? So as soon as we broach those right away, that's when I have that, like, I start right off the conversation, like, all right, like, hey, you need to sleep this many hours. Like, by the way, we've been both mentioned sleep. There's a good study showing that you're 1.7 times more likely to get injured if you don't sleep at least 7 hours a night as an athlete. So that's almost 2 times. 2 times
as likely. Yeah.
That's wild. So anyway, so we broached that right away. And so for me, luckily, it hasn't been a problem. Now this was actually a bigger problem, and like, I don't want to call it a problem, but it was more of an issue with the higher level guys that I would work with, because they would have gotten injured once. They clung on to, well, I just marked pro on all of my day befores. And it's like, okay, that's fine. And then the issue becomes they don't mark pro on that one day before.
Yeah.
But they slept like shit that night. They hadn't been eating enough. They're stressed from something going on in their relationship. They they didn't drink any water that day, and then they overloaded themselves in the off season because they played fall ball. Yeah. And then they come in and they have that one day they didn't mark pro, and then what's the thing the next day? It's because I didn't mark pro.
Yeah.
Those are the tougher conversations.
But that's a more of a superstition kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, it really is. Well, man, it's a superstition, but it's pretty real to them.
Yeah.
And it's real when you're having a conversation, and you have to have what you just mentioned, that conversation. You're like, well, yes, okay, you have to meet them where they are. You'd be like, okay, fine, and look at all this other stuff. Like that's how you have to approach it.
If you can hit the hydration number, hit the sleep number, hit the calorie number, hit the, however you determine your, mental, clarity and stuff like that, like getting rid of stressors. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like so many guys will, like, I know it's like, sometimes I feel like we use, voodoo floss a lot for our guys who have like some pain injury, and there's just guys who just get addicted to it, and that's like you're saying is that crutch. It's kind of like it gets to the point sometimes like, do you actually need this, or are you just wanting it?
You think you need it,
and they're like, I need it. I'm like, do you sure you need it? Like, are you in pain? Like, well, no, I'm not in pain, but it feels good. I'm like, how about you just go get some sleep tonight, and then we'll talk tomorrow.
You know how much trouble I'd get in? And when I was with the Twins, if one of my guys walked in and randomly like put on a sleeve and he had never worn a sleeve before, it's like, and then I'd talk to them, and who knows if they were telling the truth or lying to me. Oh no, I'm kind of just, the funniest thing, and I can say this, okay, because I'm Latin. The Latin guys are freaking hilarious because they'll literally walk in, they'll be like, hey, que lo que, me voy a poner esta acá, mira flow, puro flow, and you're like, so you're wearing that because it looks good? And like, yeah, and I'm like, I just had a 30-minute conversation about like, is your elbow falling off? So
right.
So anyway, that's as for some guys it does become a crutch. That's sort of the point that I'm making. Like,
right.
If you're going to come in and put a sleeve on every day, maybe you should go talk to the physical therapist or the athletic trainer.
Well, and it just tells me like there's bigger mechanisms at play than just I put a sleeve on, therefore I feel good.
Right.
I got wrapped with the voodoo floss, therefore all my problems are fixed.
Right.
I sat in an ice bath for 5 to 10 minutes, and therefore all my problems are now fixed.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. That's the thing. Is like, I think most guys when I was with the Twins understood that stuff was marginal.
Yeah.
It was trying to get them, especially the lower level guys that were, they're 20, 21, 22. And not that Fort Myers,
fresh out of high school, out of college.
Not that Fort Myers, Florida is like the biggest party scene you'll ever live in. But some of them are driving to Miami, to Tampa, and they want to live that life. Which, listen,
you do you.
Whom among us?
It's your 20s.
Exactly. But at some point, if you really do have aspirations to go to the higher levels, like I guess you could be Johnny Manziel, but that's typically the exception, right? I don't know if you saw his interview with Shannon Sharp. He basically said he drink every Tuesday, Thursday.
It did not go well.
Just spoiler. It didn't end well.
It did not go well.
Exactly. So anyway, sorry off topic.
No, you're good. Good. So how do you like we talked about the mental side, like how do you integrate mental and psychological support into your physical therapy programs, especially considering high pressure situations that pro athletes face, not even just high school and college guys, because there is just that bit where someone we're working with now there is that psychological bit, like, am I going to get better? Am I going to this is taking a lot longer than I thought it would, or this is a lot harder than it's kind of like what I've talked about, like the valley, we're in the valley of despair with some guys. Like, how do you bring them out of this valley of despair, or even when they're on the roller coaster down and from, it's what I call informed pessimism. Like there was like, oh, I'm going to go do my rehab. Like it's what we call like the uninformed optimism. Like I'm going to get fixed. I'm going to get and they're like, oh shit, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. And they go into this, that's the informed, what's the word? God damn it. Sadness. Like they're informed and they're like, oh, this is not as pessimism.
Pessimism.
Yeah. Informed pessimism. And then they fall into this valley of despair where like, this is really hard.
Yep.
I'm not getting better. Mm-hmm. What am I doing? And then how do you get them back on the rail to, informed optimism and then actual change?
First of all, that's tough.
It's tough.
It happens. It does happen. And I think the number one thing when I was with the Twins too, is that, we have a whole team, right? We have this entire team of sports performance coaches, clinical psychologists, if we need to, we refer to psychiatrists for if there's like medication stuff involved. Like, dude, there's a whole baseline of mental health that is like totally under talked about, especially in the sports world. I actually think like baseball does a little bit of a better job than something like think about like football, right? Like,
yeah, but because we always have quotes about the mental app.
That's true.
We have Yogi Bear. We have Yogi Bear to thank for that.
So basically, the answer to your question is, first of all, you surround yourself with a team, right? Like when I was with the Twins, that was huge. Dr. Jamie Rubin, shout out Dr. Jamie Rubin. She'll never hear this, but she's like a stud. She knows exactly how to like handle situations. So you're the way that you describe that is really interesting, because there is like there's data to show that when guys get into rehab, they are just like gung-ho. They want to get back on the diamond, right? As they go through this rehab process and the long-term rehab process, the closer they get to playing, right, to getting actually back on the field, the lower their confidence is.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh God, like that's like, there's something there, right? Like that's like they're what is it? The blue whale or whatever, like the big whale, because they haven't done it for so long. So getting them to the point where they feel ready, where they feel like they can do it, and where they feel supported is really huge. The best thing I can do, because I'm not a qualified mental health professional, right? I can be like, hey, if you're in crisis, call 988. That's like the mental health crisis line, right? That's like worst case scenario. Or if you just need some help with like performance, like I'll send you to somebody, right? I'll find somebody for you that you can have a conversation with. Like, I think you guys actually have a performance coach, right? Like basically on staff, right? So I'll definitely refer to them when I need to. So the best thing that an athletic trainer or a physical therapist can do for an athlete that's going through the long-term rehab process and you feel is struggling is just hearing them, validating their concerns, telling them like, hey, I hear you. I get what you're saying and I understand, and just leaving it at that, right? Like I used to do the thing where, and I'm still getting better at this, like try to offer solutions, or if they're, if they did way more than they thought they did, and I would say something like, and they'd come back and they'd be like down about it. And I'm like, oh my God, but you did so much, right? Like I stopped doing that with a conversation of Jamie Rubin. She told me, she's like, just let them live in that moment, let them feel that. And don't try to change that, like validate it first. And so just, not to get too whatever, heady here, but it really is just like listening to somebody, understanding what they're going through and telling them like, hey, if you need more support, like talk to me, let's have a conversation.
Yeah. It's some like I think the good analogy of what I texted you last night about is that getting them on the predictable roller coaster.
Yeah, exactly.
I just loved it. I read that in that blog. I'm like, I love that analogy.
Exactly.
It's a really good one.
Setting up expectations, I think
it's a really good one. Just like, yeah, look, we're going to make progress, but there's going to be some regression at some point.
Right.
There's going to be like it's going to be it's like, everyone thinks that progress is linear, and this is not.
Not at all.
So, what advice would you give to young baseball players, like guys that are our primary population here at FAST, and their coaches when it comes to preventing injuries?
I mean, for the athletes specifically, I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to no bullshit here. Stop pitching year round.
Yeah.
Take breaks. People say like, play another sport. I don't even care. You don't have to play another sport. Stop throwing a freaking baseball, right? Year round. Stop doing that. Go see a physical therapist. It doesn't have to be me. Yeah. Get your numbers. Go to a baseball PT. Get your numbers. Understand what your baseline is. Understand what your goals are. Sleep at least 7 hours. Honestly, 15, 16, 17 hours, I should probably be sleeping like 8, 9 hours.
Yeah.
Track your protein. Download something simple like MyFitnessPal. Just track all the protein that you have, right? Like all the protein that you intake. Stop training. We had this conversation this week. Stop training 5 days a week. You need to train, depending on your goals, 3 times max in a week at this point, right? Like everything that you do right now is like, sort of to bring back the conversation full circle about injuries. Everything you're doing now, even if you make it to the big leagues, like you're going to pay that tax eventually. Yeah. You're going to come back and pay that tax. If, the more that you hide, the more money you hide from the IRS, the bigger the penalty, right? The more that you try to run and hide from your current training regimen and your current situation because you've just gotten by and because you feel good now, like that doesn't mean that you're not going to pay that tax later. So listen to your coaches, right? As long as they're not telling you to throw you around. Abide by the pitch counts that are on MLB.com. Like, and this isn't just me, right? This is Dr. Andrews, like, right? For Godfather.
Glenn and Fleissing and
all those guys, like, they will tell you, like, the soonest you should specialize a kid. And he literally said, if there was a gun to I went to Andrews' conference a couple years ago, and he literally said, if there was a gun to my head, you made me pick an age, I would say, okay, you can specialize as a junior, but otherwise he doesn't like that, right? So pitch counts, all that stuff. Those are all the things, like they're the things that are right in front of your face, I think, and right in front of coaches' face that they just choose to ignore.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of in line with where I put her like right around 16, probably is the, if gun to my head. And like, if you really want to do baseball, then all right, then quit playing other sports at 16.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, and not saying quit, but like, quit the other sports, but do them outside, but don't put your focus more into baseball.
Right.
So how do you involve, and I don't know how much experience you have in it just yet, having worked in the pro levels, but involving parents, because I think, the parents want what's best for the kid, but they also want them back out on the field because they have this, I want to see my kid play. I want to see him happy and all that. But, it's broaching that conversation like this is going to take time, or this is going to take whatever it takes. But like, we'll get your kid back to where he was pre-injury and hopefully better, but you're going to need to take some time with it.
Yeah.
And using them as a support system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that getting on the same page with parents is tough, right? So that's still something, like you said, I'm still sort of navigating those waters, learning how to navigate them more efficiently. And what I've learned, honestly, man, in the last few years, just as a human and as a PT, the more direct you can be, the easier it is. And at the end of the day, right, this applies to you, this applies to me, we can just give recommendations. Nobody has to do exactly what we tell them to. But if you, on the front end, talk to parents with the kid and you say, these are reasonable expectations. If you're going to work with me, these are my recommendations. Honestly, I'm not to the point where I feel comfortable yet, but if I got to that point, I would be comfortable to say, if you're not going to follow these recommendations and we are going to stray from the path, no hard feelings. I hold no animosity to you. We have a fundamental foundational disagreement about the health of your kid. And if that's the case, I will find somebody that I can send you that will be okay with that, but that's not going to be me. Mm-hmm. And luckily I haven't had to do that yet, but that's just honestly, like, that's the approach that I would hope that if I got in that situation that I would take.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that parents can be a help to you in helping support the recovery of their kids and their overall athletic development?
I know this is going to sound cliche, but don't try to live your dream through them.
Yes.
I've already run into some parents who, they want their kid to do the thing, and the kid has told me directly, like, I could do without it, right? Yeah. I don't have kids, so I don't want to give parenting advice. I just, as an outsider, when I see that, it kind of makes me a little sad. I'm like, hey, like, you're putting in all this work, effort, and energy. It sort of feels like you're doing it for your parent or your guardian or whoever it is. Like, that's not great. Like, if a kid wants to do it for them, that's one thing. Like, I get that. That's a different conversation. But, like, in terms of parents, I think, again, I don't want to give parenting advice, but I think just having an honest conversation with your kid, if you haven't yet, just be like, hey, how bad do you want this? Yeah. And come from an actual place, right? Like, not how bad do you want this? It's an actual question. It's a genuine question. Like, let's talk about it, because maybe this isn't the path we need to go down.
Yeah, maybe you want to be an accountant. It's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Somebody needs to account for things.
Yeah, someone accountants are necessary in the world.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So as we'll begin kind of wrapping this up, because we got to do a meeting, looking ahead, what are the goals and new initiatives that you hope to introduce here at Pro Athlete PT downstairs at FAST and, in the coming years?
Honestly, man, like, I hope that in 20, 30 years, people look back, or I can look back and laugh at how many fires we were putting out. And instead we can, reap the benefits of how many injuries that we, in theory, prevented with our data, right? Projecting forward, like, for every maintenance program given, that's going to go into this database. And I want to see, like, hey, compared to the numbers over here, how many injuries happened after these guys and girls got on a maintenance plan. And hopefully, like I said, in 20, 30 years, the numbers are minuscule, or at least put a dent into
they're going in the right direction.
Right. Going in the right direction. Even if we tread water, right? Like, that's still, I think, can be progress. So the initiatives, honestly, from a big picture perspective, and I say this pretty much everywhere, is I want athletes to get healthy, stay healthy, and perform at the next level. And that's really where I want to go with everything that we're doing. So, and a big part of that is getting on an actual, like, maintenance program. And I think you do great work. Jason does great work. It's unbelievable to me how many people don't actually prioritize that. So that's my thoughts, or my closing thoughts, I guess.
Yeah. And lastly, so for those interested, because we get a lot of guys who, want to be in the sports world and be in working with kind of stuff like this. Like, for those who are interested in a career in sports physical therapy, what advice would you give them based on your experiences and how the landscape of the field has been changing?
Yeah, so I'm only 4 years into this. I don't want to sound like an old head, but it sort of goes back to what I was saying before. Get the reps under your belt. Mm-hmm. You have to go. What's the phrase? The phrase that I heard from one of my mentors is something like, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's like, if you want to go fast, go alone. Yeah. If you want to go far, go together. Yeah. And the best way that you can do that is in a place like this, where you have every resource at your disposal that you possibly want, from nutrition, sleep, physical readiness, performance standpoint, right? Like, that, learning from everybody, right? And that's the number one thing that I learned when I was with the Twins, because we had all those teams, right? Like, I try to have as many conversations as I could with people, sort of privately, of like, hey, what is your perspective on this and why? And a lot of my influences still are with the Twins, right? Because those people have so many different perspectives and viewpoints that you eventually meld into your own. And the more that you can pull and apply to your expertise as a PT, or as a sort of aspiring PT, the more knowledge you have, the better off you're going to be. Like, can you start a practice on your own and say that you're going to see baseball players because you played college ball? You can. But to me, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that it's going to make you a good PT. So it doesn't sound sexy. It doesn't sound fun.
It's never sexy.
I promise you, like, my wife would agree. Like, I'm the most when it comes to business, when it comes to personal relationships, when it comes to everything, like, I am impatient. That's my number one flaw. I'm impatient AF. But the best thing that I did before I got into practice on my own was pull from all those different experiences. So that's what I would say.
Nice. So Evan, before we go, where can people find you on the social media? Where can they reach out to you if they're interested in getting some maintenance programs, or they're getting into, I got an injury? Where can they come and find you?
Yeah, 4650 Layden Street, Unit F. You know, not Unit D. A lot of people come in looking for Unit D, Unit F,
Yes.
right? Inside of Fast Performance. That's where I'm at, right? Find me online at Pro Athlete PT, basically all the handles, proathletept.com. You can set up a free discovery call with me. And then I wanted to mention, so I'm super lucky, super fortunate, very blessed. Like, my schedule's starting to really fill up, but I've budgeted enough. I know that the some guys and girls are coming back. I've budgeted time for 5 free evaluations for FAST members specifically. So if you train at FAST in any capacity and you're an athlete, specifically baseball, obviously it doesn't have to be baseball, it can be other sports. You get a free specialty. Baseball's your specialty, right? So you'll get a free eval. Usually my rate is $250 per hour, but that's going to be free. And that's just because I love the work that we're doing here. I'm super fortunate to be here, man, and this was fun.
Yeah, we're super happy to have you. Super fortunate. Finally, guys who've listened to this podcast before or have known ever since we moved in here, like, that's been the one piece where, like, if we could just get a PT in here, like, it would, change the game for us instead of having to ship people out somewhere else. Like, if we could just make this a one-stop shop. So I'm like, we're finally realizing that plan. Like, we've got the baseball, now we've got we've had the strength and conditioning and the baseball. It's like, now we've got that maintenance piece and that rehab piece that has always been kind of missing for us.
Yeah,
so
man,
we're fucking pumped to have you.
One-stop shop.
All right. Thank you, Edwin, so much for coming on. It was awesome to have you. As we wrap up today's insightful conversation on the Fast Performance Baseball podcast, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our guest, Edwin Porras, for joining us and sharing his extensive knowledge and innovative approaches to sports physical therapy. Edwin's dedication is not just about healing, but enhancing athletic performance through proactive care, which is truly inspiring. For our listeners, we hope today's episode enriches your understanding of the importance of physical therapy in baseball and in other sports at large, and how a proactive approach can significantly alter the trajectory of an athlete's career. Remember, it's not just about recovering from injuries, it's about preventing them and optimizing your performance to its fullest potential. To learn more about Edwin's work and how to get in touch with him, visit Pro Athlete PT's website or follow their updates on social media. All links will be provided in the episode description. If you found today's discussion valuable, don't forget to subscribe to the Fast Performance Baseball podcast on your favorite platform to stay updated with our latest episodes. We love bringing you deep dives into the world of baseball with the experts that help shape it. Join us next time as we continue to explore the more facets of baseball performance, training, and innovation. Until then, keep playing, keep practicing, and remember to take care of your body. It's your most valuable piece of equipment. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode.